international school startups. We'll be discussing some key aspects of founding international schools. First, let me introduce our panel to you. Barry Cooper is the founding principal at the Global College Madrid, a role he has held since the school opened in 2021. He has 22 years of experience across boarding schools around the world. Now in Madrid, he is constantly looking for opportunities to develop his students' cultural intelligence. His LinkedIn profile reads, "Making a difference through education," and he is certainly doing that today in his continued attempts to innovate at the Global College. Next, we have Martin Harris. Martin is the principal at the Lisbon International School in Portugal. Martin's leadership and guidance have significantly contributed to the growth of the Lisbon International School, setting high standards for academic excellence and creating an environment conducive to holistic development of the school. Lastly, Emma Mary Horridge is the head of junior school at Stonyhurst International School, Penang. She took part in setting up the junior school in Stonyhurst International School and planned and organized the Fobesia Teaching Conference for over 50 schools across in Asia in 2021. If you have any questions, please leave them in the chat box, or we'll open the floor for Q&A session by the end of the webinar. We would appreciate for all participants to have their cameras on if that's possible. Thank you. I'll now formally hand it over to Barry, who will begin our webinar with an overview of this session today.
Thank you very much, Jane. So introduction and goals, everything's there on our PowerPoint. But I think with the two people we have with us today, with Martin and Emma, it's a great one to look at the organisation, the nitty gritty, and also that fostering of culture in international schools, which can be so difficult, especially when you're bringing people together from these disparate nations, expats coming from all around the world to start something new and amazing for many of them a new country. So we're going to talk about strategies to overcome teething problems. We're going to talk about positive relationships. I know that there's a question in there about legal stuff and organizational stuff. So we'll just kick straight off with, I think, the first question. And I think that's one I'm going to direct straight at Martin, because I feel like being mean. And what are the initial essential roles for a startup school? What can't you live without, Martin?
Oh, coffee first thing in the morning is the straightforward answer, Barry. But yeah, it's really interesting, Barry. Can I just go back one step before I answer the question? Because I think forums like this are so important, particularly when you get dumped into a city that you don't know, where you don't know anybody. It's so important to have the connections. So I will be eternally grateful to Andre for setting up this forum where we can connect to each other. So whatever else we do this morning, I think making strong connections across continents between heads is crucial. The essential roles at a startup, for me, I looked at where my strengths and where my weaknesses were, which was an interesting exercise to do after 20 years of being ahead, and probably a very good one to do. And I knew that I needed a team that were going to fill some of those gaps. And in particular, having just been ahead mainly in British schools in the UK, I knew that I needed a team that had international experience and really good international experience. So I would say, don't worry too much about titles. Don't get too hung up on titles, but look for people, good people who buy into the same values and ethos as you do, who are not scared to challenge you, by the way. I don't think we all want yes people in that position, but basically who between you form a great team and cover all the bases.
I couldn't agree more. Emma, being on the other side of the planet, is that exactly the same view from your perspective, or are there slight things that opening a school in Malaysia you found you couldn't live without?
I think it's really similar about having a team and having a good mixture of international experience. One of the roles that we didn't set up early enough, or the types of roles that I think we suffered from and we're trying to correct, was really thinking about some of the lower level kind of teacher roles, like common room committees and those sorts of things, about looking after each other. So we were really focused on, let's get our principals in our place, our heads of schools in place, and subject coordinators, and really thinking about the school. And a big thing that we talk about to our students is all about, the ethos of, it comes first, the holistic education. And with our staff, I think that's something we forgot a little bit at the start. And if that was, one of those mistakes to overcome in those essential roles, I think looking at those simple roles that the staff can do for each other, who's going to get the coffee into the staff room, who's going to set up those mini socials that are not the big school things, and make sure the WhatsApp group is being inclusive of everybody. Those are some of the key things, especially as you do go into your second year, and hopefully your school is going to grow significantly and you want to keep moving those things forward. Your leadership team kind of don't have time for all of the on the ground nitty gritty bits. So not forgetting that, I think, is a really helpful part. And they're the things that people are keen to do as well. So I think that's a lesson that we probably learned. And this year, as people have stepped up into some of those more well-being type roles, we've seen a real difference in that quality for people. And I think if you could have that established from the get-go and really appreciated by your staff.
Fantastic. And thinking about events, that it kind of leads on to the second question that's on this slide. And this is a question from Zoe Wickham Abbey, but I don't think this is just Chinese parents like Hollywood style events. I think it's a lot of parents, that's what they're after. So Emma, from where you're sitting, how do you then reconcile the need for external marketing events, internal marketing events, and parents' desires for the real kind of educational events that you want to pull together at Stonyhurst?
So I think one of the key things you have to be a little bit careful of, in my more established schools in the past, my belief is always process over product. So you want to get teachers, parents in for take a peek, see the children in action in the classroom, and see the ongoing realistic things day to day. And it's not so much about what the outcome is, it's about the process along the way and really advertising that. One thing to be a little bit careful of when you're starting your international school is you can't have the same level of confidence in your entire system from the get-go because you haven't seen everything in place yet. Are your resources all in place where they need to be? Have you done your learning walks and seen your teachers yet to know that they're teaching in the way that you want them to be teaching? Have you got your lesson observations there? Are you confident that what you're selling to the parents in that take a peek situation is what you want it to be? So actually, I think perhaps in your first term, you might want to stick with a little bit of Hollywood type show so that the parents get to see something, they feel happy, especially because I'm coming from that younger end of the market where parents want to see things, they want to know things about their children, and really quickly make sure as the leader that what's happening in the classroom is what you want to be happening, because then you can turn it around and get the parents involved to come and observe lessons, to come and see things that are happening inside the classroom. And then the marketing takes care of itself. But you have to be confident before you do that. They're not going to walk into a maths lesson and none of your pneumicons arrived and the lesson doesn't look how it should look. So, make sure first you're where you need to be. And there may be things that you've done for a long time in more established settings that you won't be ready for until you've ticked those boxes internally yourself. So I think long term, we don't want to necessarily be doing Hollywood style, but be prepared to do a little bit of place holding until you're where you want to be.
Martin, from your perspective, launching a school in Lisbon and being kind of you're kind of in that process of getting people moving and getting the name out there. Are you a fan of the Hollywood style of big wow, or do you really want to get the potential parents understanding the teaching and the learning and what you're going to bring to the classroom?
Oh, come on, Barry. Of course I'm a fan of the Hollywood. I put on, a golden jacket, I sing and I dance. No, I think there's two sides to this. When I saw this question ping up on the screen just now, I think there's two aspects of it. As you say, there's the marketing side of it, but there's also, once the school's open, talking to parents about various educational matters, which I'm afraid to say can, on the surface, appear sort of almost the opposite of Hollywood, the glitz and the glam, but they're just that doesn't mean they're not important. They're vital, and I think we have to sort of strike a balance. So I think one of the interesting things we found, Barry, is in marketing is not just me talking, but getting my team to talk and presenting in a different style. I think nothing turns people off more than hearing sort of an hour or an hour and a half of just someone droning on. It's important to have different styles, and so that engages people. We've also found doing smaller sort of sessions where we almost like a small lesson with my senior staff has worked really, really well. So, for example, we might have a general chat to about 50 prospective parents and then break up into talking about sixth form, talking about life outside the classroom, and moving around. So empowering your senior staff to do different aspects of that is really important as well. And I would say once the school's open, when you start talking about some more serious educational matters, so I'm thinking back to my last sort of 3 or 4 conversations with parents. We did information evenings on eating disorders with teenagers, with screen time for all children, etc. These are quite serious topics, and again, it worked really well if you can run those as almost like a lesson where you split. We would all split a lesson up into 10-15-minute segments. Parents love that as well. So it's Hollywood in our own educational style.
Absolutely. I think the best things I've ever run have always been those collaborative and the parents talking to one another, the parents experiencing things. We did when I worked in Scotland in the boarding school Loreto, we actually had them come and experience classes as well and just sit, and this is how we teach GCSE. And they were like, oh, actually, this is quite fun. I mean, a bit of a giggle, and some of them were quite naughty school children, but it gets them understanding where we're coming from. There was a great question just came up in the chat. It's examples of Hollywood style events. I know when I worked in China, there was very serious discussion of bringing essentially a traveling zoo to the Summer Fete, including an elephant. So that's at the kind of the far end. Martin, Emma, have you got like one example of kind of mad ideas that have been kind of pitched to you, the Hollywood style events?
Emma, should I go first, or would you like to go first?
Go.
Well, I think the best thing I've ever seen is we used to have a sort of gathering of staff and pupils. In the old days, it would have been called chapel, but it sort of morphed and it became a wonderful sort of sing along. And we would invite heads from other schools, and it happened to be the 50th birthday of one particular head, and he said, "Would you mind if I rode my motorbike into the hall?" And so he arrived literally driving his Harley Davidson down the middle of the theatre, and sort of turned around at the front, gave it a couple of revs, and he had every single child and parent in the palm of his hands. He could have talked about anything in the world and they would have listened. So it was wonderful entrance.
Yeah, we had Santa on a tuk-tuk, which went well as well. I think that one of the most Hollywood style ones I've done was at my previous school, which was Brighton, which was also a startup. But this was purely the drama teacher, not my leading, but it actually was really good. They'd done their own movies in Key Stage 2, and they did an award ceremony, which was like the Oscars, and they had big, Oscar-style statues that I don't know where they managed to find them in Bangkok, and a red carpet, and the parents dressed up in their fancy dress and the children dressed up, and then they went to watch the movies that they'd made. And again, it was, it's not necessarily the thing that you want to do every day, but actually the parents absolutely loved getting dressed up. They loved walking on the red carpet and there was a paparazzi stand, to take your photos. And then they got to see the movies that the children had made, which was really fantastic. And they did a little awards ceremony at the end. So I think that's probably the most glitz and glam version that we've done. No elephants. But it was a really loved event. So sometimes there is a place for it where they enjoy, but you don't want that to be the be all and end all.
I think with those sorts of events, project managers are often needed. Often they come from the parents. But there was a question that came from Leo Hara, who they're going to bring a project manager and put them in place. Now, I don't know if this is for the startup process or it's for projects while you're extant and you're already running. But if you have a project manager, how do you get the best value out of them, and what can be the pitfalls? So, Emma, what do you think?
We don't currently have a particular project manager for this in place. We had a project manager who was in charge of the building. I definitely think you have to have local staff on side who are working really closely with them, that are ensuring that they are, you know, following the criteria and the set deadlines. So everybody knows exactly what the expectations are and when. We don't have a specific project manager in place for our events now in school. That's distributed amongst the academic team.
Martin, are you using one?
Barry,
or is
I
it
would
you?
agree with Emma that it's I suspect this is a role that changes from school to school and around the world. An interesting one. I think it's a role that, like Emma, I would sort of split up between my senior team. However, I found, you know, I presume a project manager doesn't necessarily need to be someone who has an academic background, and it could be someone who's coming in from a different world, excuse me, to help run the school. But inclusion is vital, and so whether you call them a senior leader or a you know, middle manager, or any of these sort of different phrases, keeping them in the loop, making sure that they are part of decision making is the key. And I think that communication line is vital. So I would suggest, and I hope I haven't gone off at a sort of tangent there, but I would suggest that like any role is crucial.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think it kind of comes onto our next slides as well. But it's that idea of the communicating vision, mission, and making sure everyone's on the same page, and also having those constant catch-ups, which I think when you're starting a school, it's I have someone who refers to it quite, I think, pejoratively as, you know, conversations in the corridors, but actually that sometimes is the most important thing when you're, you know, taking the pulse of what's happening. I mean, the next section we were going to deal with is decision making. But the question I think is really interesting, and that's the difference between priorities that you thought were priorities when you were sat around a table planning and creating your school, and then what actually ended up being priorities. I think I'm with Emma, and one of the things we completely forgot about was, you know, organization of staff, you know, the socials, the mini socials, you know, gluing that community together, and we didn't get to that until very late. But we've, you know, during the first year, I have a great team member who takes kind of lead on that. But what from your perspective then, Martin, what do you think are the differences between the planning and the reality in any school?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, Barry. I think that there's two aspects, if I may be sort of greedy and have two. Firstly is making sure that you're aligned with your parent company, the investors, whoever's put up the backing for the school. I've seen so many heads who have had that a sort of buffer, and problems if they've arrived have been because the priorities aren't aligned. So I think that, to me, before taking any job, making any move across different countries is crucial. And I think the second thing for me personally here has been moving from having that wonderful blank piece of paper that I was presented with to start the school, to then realizing that actually it isn't really blank at all, that budgets and pupil numbers and projections actually are what drive this. And so when you start off with a sort of A3 piece of paper, you gradually find that you have to make compromises. And as long as I think you hold on to some of the core values and ideas that you had at the very beginning, there's no problem with compromise. It's just being able to hang on to those. So the A3 paper probably ends up being more like a sort of A4 or A5 piece of paper.
I love that analogy, and I'm stealing that. Emma, from your perspective, I mean, in Malaysia, again, I think I'm quite keen on seeing if there are differences on kind of either side of the world. But from your perspective, what were the priorities that you ended up saying, no, that's not right, that's not a priority, and where did you refocus?
I think one of the things with us is we are a sister school to Stonyhurst in the UK, which is a really old school, sort of 500 years of history. And that was a big part of what we sold. We're the first international school for Stonyhurst. And a lot of what we sold prior to the school opening was about the ethos of the school and what you're buying into. However, what we found when people joined the school, we thought they've bought into that ethos. We thought they've bought into that story. That's why they're joining the school. But actually what they hadn't, they bought into shiny new building, swimming pool, you know, that side of thing. It's a new school, what the school fees are, the system within Malaysia, which has quite a good system for student visa passes from Korea, China, and Japan. So it works out as a good system, and they'd sort of bought into your English and your maths lessons and your IGCSE and your A-level. And we didn't sort of have to expect to actually then sell what our ethos was and what our pastoral care was, what our beliefs are in terms of those things, which we had really sold prior to people signing up to the school. But actually, it wasn't necessarily what people had bought into. Whereas, of course, with our sister school, it's got a long history and people have bought into that before they've joined. So since that time, a lot of our parent workshops and the things we've had to work on have had to be around that shared vision so that the parents are on board with what it is that we're doing with the children, and really selling that of what our expectations are, because we are a school that sells ourselves very much on it's an equal mix of academic and pastoral care. It's a holistic vision, and you know, the parents were joining just purely thinking grades, GCSEs, A levels, and then we're trying to sell another picture as part of that. And I think that's the thing of, you know, that knowing the market are coming to us in Malaysia as a new school, as a system for visas, as a belief about results, and not necessarily buying into those other things. And therefore, a lot of the work we've had to do has been on what our approach is, what our history is, what our virtues are, and how we believe they make a better educational system for our children. So when we're talking about the children doing service learning, it's not an optional, I want to pull out and do an extra maths lesson. No, this is, you know, doing charitable work is a really key part of this school. That's what you've signed into. So yeah, that thinking about what you think you're selling and what's actually being sold can be two different things.
That's fantastic, and it's something I think we've all experienced. There was a great question that popped up in the chat about overcoming priorities, where the owners and maybe school priorities are slightly different. I think from my perspective, it's always the conversation that you have to have that shows the priorities of the school lead to a great school, which then lead to effectively the concern is going to be about numbers, is going to be about marketing, is going to be about bottom line. And I think that's often the conversation I've had, which is explaining how the priorities of the educational side of the school will inevitably lead to the priorities of the owner being fulfilled. And then sometimes it goes the other way, where you know the argument on my side isn't quite there, and it was a nice to have, and we come to a conclusion, or we come to an agreement about next year maybe we'll fund that, and then we get back to kind of the core business. Is that kind of a similar from your perspectives, Martin? What do you think?
Yeah, Barry, I thought it was a really good question from Johan, because I think that you know, we've sort of talked on a very general level, and actually the nitty-gritty is that you've got to talk, you've got to communicate. And it was a year before I got this right. I'm blaming myself. I think it's obviously a two-way process. And we now have a formal meeting once a week where we discuss a topic. This week we've been discussing learning without walls and how to budget for that. And then we have a half hour to talk about the sort of personal side. And that's usually, you know, how are you getting on, Martin? You know, how's your wife and children, and those sort of questions, which is great. So it is that communication. But I think what I would say is being able to approach the person who makes the final decision in an open way is absolutely vital. If you can't do that, you know, it's always going to be a problem. And it took us a year to sort of resolve that. Because I'm working for a young company as well, who are also finding their way and how these things work.
Emma, I mean, you're working for a very old company. So is there a difference of approach when you're kind of reconciling priorities?
Yeah, I mean, our board as well is made up as a two aspects. So you have the Stonyhurst part of the board, which is a very old company, but equally we have Tail, which is our owners, which is a newer company. It's their first international school, hopefully of many. So again, it's those equal perspectives between here are the academic agreements that we have made with Stonyhurst that must be in place. And then absolutely the bottom line and the financial side that come from the investment company of what needs to be in place to be a functioning school. And yeah, it was funny when you said the need to have, we have a lot of conversations of what's in the nice to have column and what's in the need to have column. Yeah, it's a big part of conversations. And I do think trying to get your middle leadership team on board with that is really helpful as well. Particularly when overseeing sort of the secondary school budgets, because there's so many different departments where, you know, they're the expert and you have to trust them. My background's not in science, so I have to be able to trust that if the science department tells me they need this chemical for IGCSE, then they need these chemicals for IGCSE, and equally that they're not, you know, sneaking things in that are in the nice to have column. So, you know, really getting the staff on board with that in the initial process of let's really get the priorities right of all these need to have things, because there's so much across the school that you need to invest in. But yeah, that's a very frequent topic of conversation. Nice to have and need to have.
Definitely. I think the next section is more about that communication as well. So it's the fostering of inclusivity, culture, the diversity of international education. How do international schools foster and cultivate international mindedness and cultural competence amongst their students and staff? Thomas, so that is a massive question that I could probably talk to you about for hours. And if you fancy connecting, I'd love to pick your brains and we can share ideas about that. But in the time we have kind of available, I mean, what do we think is key in creating that environment? Emma, what do you think? How do you do it?
I mean, when I was in Bangkok, this was something where it was actually a lot easier because you had so much shared culture. So the school there in a way was much less international. You had 60% were Thai, you had strong Thai culture, you had lots of Thai staff who could help you relate to that Thai culture and then help you to develop the international mindedness. And often then the other percentage had some relationship to Thailand. So there was sort of like a shared starting point to move forwards with. Definitely in Malaysia, and anyone who knows Malaysian context, there's much more of a melting point. So even before you bring in the international joiners that we have in the school, just within Malaysia, you have the Malays, you have the Chinese Malays, you have the Indian Malays, and there is a certain amount of tension and cooperation that needs to come from that point. And then you have the add-ons of lots of, we have so many different nationalities. I think we had 35 at our International Day last week. I think the really key part there is reaching out to the different communities so that you can establish what those frame of minds are. So with our local staff, we've tried to make sure that we actually do hire a mixture of Chinese Malay, Malay and Indian Malay, so that they can really give us that cultural context locally, looking at our school calendar and making sure we're placing equal emphasis on different events. Malaysia has 1 million bank holidays. I noticed it came up of where you want to work, so a very popular place, but there are lots of different celebrations here, and you have to make sure you're being respectful to those different celebrations, but then developing that international mindfulness by saying, but we're going to come back, we're going to celebrate this British event, we're going to celebrate some of these Chinese events, etc. And one of the ways we found have been supportive in developing this has been our parent-teacher association. We were lucky that this got established really early on. We have an amazing admissions department who had already established our sort of Friends of Stonyhurst group before the school was open. So there was already a core group of parents in there who were working, and we had subcommittees from different larger nationalities that were represented in our school, and we met with them and asked, you know, which key things are really important to you, and hopefully we've been able to use that to you know, develop international mindfulness, but also make sure we're we're speaking to them and talking to them as things come up. And as rumors start to spread within particular nationalities, we're then being contacted so we can address things quickly. But you do have to keep working on it. We had an international day last week, and it even came down to, you know, how many photos were taken of different stalls and what was posted on social media. So I think it's something that you have to constantly promote, but also constantly be mindful of yourself, that this is really important to the parents and that they feel represented.
Martin, are you as big a melting pot in Lisbon, or is it a slightly different environment?
I've been called many things, Barry, but not a melting pot. Yeah, no, it is. It is absolutely international city. The Portuguese here have been actively welcoming people from all around the world, and we have some 313 families, I think it is, registered for next year when we open. 51 different nationalities. So and that was, you know, without us having to try very hard, Barry. So yeah, definitely an international place. In the UK, a few years ago, we were told to tolerate difference. And I never felt comfortable with that word, because tolerate to me is a passive thing, whereas we need to be actively engaging. And I think, you know, exactly what Emma was just saying there, remembering that it's not just the staff and pupils, it's also parents that are involved in this, and need to all feel as a part of one. And we've actually used belong as the first word in our core values. So belong, it means wherever you're from, whatever your beliefs, outlook on life, it doesn't matter. You are all part of this community. There's a wonderful thing on LinkedIn, Barry, that is an iceberg. I think it's called the cultural iceberg, that sort of pops up every now and then on my feeds. And it shows you the top of the iceberg, all the things that we can say we do. But the underneath is the, you know, can you walk the walk as well as talk the talk, and what you need to do to make the community inclusive.
I think that's absolutely right. I think sometimes the top level, these kind of events can be window dressing, and I think it's that celebration that you're talking about is so vital. We had, I mean, for example, last year we had our first cohort. We only had 115, and one of the students, practicing Muslim, celebrating Ramadan and wanted to have an iftar at the school. Fantastic, 30, 40 students all turned up. We have a kitchen on site, so they cook different meals from around the world. It was brilliant. But the reality of that, also, she was celebrating Ramadan. We needed to find her space for her, to pray while she was at college, because she wanted to celebrate in that way. And it was just slightly rejigging, moving her class, and it was fine. It was great. But the for her and her ability to follow her faith and follow her traditions, I think for me, that was the real win. It was a great meal, and I sat there and ate Portuguese custard tarts for the entire night. But for me, the big win was for that young woman being able to celebrate her faith with other people, and for other people to see us celebrating that. So it meant that actually more people started talking about, well, could we do this? And I think that's always the win. I think as we go on to the next question, we're onto the nitty-gritty now. I think we're going to be talking about budgets in the next section. And I think that's one of the biggest issues when you're kind of talking with, between owners and heads on the academic and the cultural side, but also facilities and things like that. So, I mean, the prioritization of budgets, Martin, how do you, I think that's the next slide. I'm not sure, it's not shifted on, or at least mine hasn't. Martin, when we're talking about budgets, how do you prioritize budgets? What's the thought process? What's the way you do it? Is there a model? Is there a way that you go about this? Talk us through your process in making sure you're spending money in the right places.
I think we could, again, as you said with the last slide, we could spend all day talking about this, couldn't we? And I think the realization that you have a limited budget is the key thing here, Barry. But I would go back to Emma and your discussion about what you really like to have, and what is essential, and making sure that those are very, very clear. We've actually just been through the process of drawing up what we need for next year for the resources in every department and every area of the school. And so making sure that you've covered every area of the school, of course, is key. I've had to go through the unfortunate process of trying to cut areas, and I think one of the questions sort of asked, what, how do you when finances are tight, how do you prioritize? I would always prioritize people ahead of anything else. A great teacher can teach under a tree in the gymnasium, not just in a classroom. And just go for a high quality staff. And I think in startup schools, having staff who are willing to be flexible as well as great teachers is absolutely where I would prioritize limited finances. Can I also say, before I took this job, I had never appreciated quite how important procurement can be in a limited budget. And I know some schools, even employ someone to oversee that. I suspect in most startups we can't afford to do that, but overseeing that process and having a process for procurement is crucial. I mean, Brexit has caused so many problems. I'm sure you found in Madrid, but so many problems in terms of, particularly if you're following a British curriculum, in securing textbooks, etc. But yeah, I hope I've answered the question there, Barry.
Absolutely. I think people come first. I mean, it's the way I tend to think as well. Emma, from your perspective, I mean, how do you prioritize the budgets?
100% people first. I think that we're all very strongly agreed on that one. As you mentioned, with when we were doing our budgeting, it was kind of that post-COVID era where shipping was ridiculously expensive. So one of our big things was definitely looking for local resources over the traditional Findle, etc., because naturally different heads of department sent through to us, oh yeah, I need to have all of these items, and they've gone through the Findle catalogue. But not only is it the cost of the item, but then it's the shipping costs were ridiculous, and also the time constraints. We just couldn't get them to Malaysia, so we really had to shop around and find what resources were available locally, and which things might take longer for us to get there for. And if you've got the right people, they can work around that, and if you don't have the right people, that's going to cause a problem because they only have one thing in one way. I do remember sort of looking at being in Penang on the beach, and the EYFS order included sand ordered from England. So there are often some things that you can make easy wins with. Another area we did that I don't know if other schools choose to do, but one of the really expensive things to resource is technology. So we made the decision as a new school straight from the get-go to have a bring your own device policy rather than providing lots and lots of class sets of iPads and laptops. And following COVID, again, the children often had those devices. So it allowed us that flexibility. So sometimes really thinking about what's the context and what's appropriate and what's not. That was a real big, I think, win for us by starting that from the beginning. Whereas older, more established schools, it can be more difficult to establish.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. The other question, I skipped over one and we went for budgets first. The common pitfalls in the first 12 months of a new international school. I think probably all of us were thinking visas when we saw this. From my perspective, a teacher not turning up was the key thing when we started last year. We managed to rejig, resource, and we got someone within a couple of weeks to fill that position. But I think we were incredibly lucky to find a really great replacement. Emma, from your perspective, then what was the big disaster? What was the big pitfall? What was the big kind of issue you had to deal with in the first 12 months of opening?
So 0 of our expat teachers had their visa on day one. So we started with just local teachers for a couple of weeks. And I think that comes down to local cultures. I know we now have a really good visa agent, but here the context in Malaysia is that the process has to go through the Ministry of Education and be approved first before it goes to the Expatriate Services Division and then come in and be allowed to work. In previous settings in Bangkok and the UAE, you could kind of get an entry visa for potential teachers, and the teachers' permits and things go through later. So certainly from my previous experience, it was a much slower process here. And without sounding disparaging against any different nationalities and cultures and things, different visa agents definitely have different timeframes. So the first visa agent that we employed, it took them 4 months to get this visa process done. This year, in hiring our current visa agents, got the processes through in 2 months. So I think, you know, getting that right local context and getting the right people on board and speaking to other local international schools and establishing a good relationship. We've joined up with the British Council. We're in the process of joining FOBISIA, so that you can have those local networks. You can say, oh yeah, this team is really great. This team's really great. Means that we are now confident for our recruitment year on year. And obviously the particular person that we had in the first year just didn't have the right relationship with the visa office or with the MOE. So, you know, those political contexts that you're not necessarily familiar with when you're moving as the academic leads, so important to get the right local connections. It's really, really, really key.
What about for you, Martin? Is it visas again, or are there other aspects in the first 12 months that you think kind of people need to understand and know about?
Onboarding your staff is definitely one of the greatest challenges, and you know, anyone who tries to cut HR, you know, particularly like Emma, you know, Portugal has a really complicated process to get staff in here, and you know, just look at that very carefully. I would say the other thing about pitfalls is that a lot of them are outside your control, a little bit like that process of onboarding staff. You know, we are actually delayed for a year through no fault of our own, but through a building irregularity that cropped up at Easter time this year, and we had to make the really painful decision to delay the opening. So there's nothing anybody could have done about that. And I think just be aware of those potential pitfalls outside your control. I would say the other thing I've seen in a couple of startup schools, Barry, is the staff work balance, because I think in your first year you tend to be, I won't say skeleton staff, but you're certainly perhaps a smaller staff, and yet wanting to do as much as you possibly can, and that small number gets stretched. And certainly I've seen in our sister school, you know, desperate to make a big impression, and the staff are, you know, pretty exhausted in that first year. So it's making sure that you get that balance right. You can't do everything straight away.
Absolutely. Moving on to the final section then, and we're going to talk a little bit about well-being there, I think, as well. The first question is an interesting one, and we've been talking about this already in terms of pitfalls. Advice on securing local legal counsel. I think that for me is a really interesting question. The way we did it here was it depended on the job we needed doing. So if it was visas, finding the right people to deal with that. If it was something else, finding the right people to deal with that. And always you need to reach out through your own connections, through the owners, through your key stakeholders. And then I think Martin, you had this phrase when we discussed this question earlier, the beauty parade, of having kind of these people come talk to you about what they do and how they've done it, and going from there. I think what I would say from this question is, if Wes Pratt asked this, if you want to get in touch with Andre, or get in touch with a few of us, we can maybe make some suggestions about firms that we've worked with in the past in different countries. I know that you're in China, but I think also these kinds of forums where we can discuss this sort of thing are an opportunity to find people in different countries and actually reach out and say, look, this is my issue. what can you suggest? And my experience of head teachers, of principals, of teachers, of people working in this industry is everyone's always ready to help and give advice and give suggestions and give pointers. But I want to talk about the really important thing, which is what we've just been discussing: staff well-being during challenging times. And I think this warrants a good kind of 5 minutes. Emma, how do you do it? How do you preserve staff well-being and yours as the leader during that startup process? Because you got to remember, if you collapse, then lots of other things are going to go wrong. What did you do?
When we first didn't have our staff, we made the decision to fly them out to Bangkok so they were closer and feeling a little bit more relaxed, which obviously came at a huge cost to the school, but it meant they were close. As soon as the visas went through, they could move in, they could get here and get started. And sometimes, things that might seem like a big thing for the school, but it made a massive deal to the staff because they still got to be together. They still got to do some of that bonding. They still got to establish some of those relationships and get on the right schedule, as it were. So the moment our visas came through, they could all move, and they were not doing that big move. And I think that was a really key thing that we did, was making sure we established that relationship between them. As I said before, I think where we went wrong was not then formalizing some of those systems in the school in the first year. And that's something this year we've really done, is formalized some of those roles of people who are looking after the staff, that common room committee, who are making sure everybody's involved, everybody's got somewhere to be. This year, we have daft things, a football group, so you join that WhatsApp group if you want to. There's a netball group another night of the week. One of the wives is a yoga teacher, and she comes onto the site and does yoga another night of the week. And they're all dip-in options, obviously, but they do make a big difference for people who've moved and just need to establish a community. They're now prioritized. There's something every day that you can be a part of, that's really, really key. And I think sort of trying to get some of those things set up externally then helps to bring people down. But to your point as well of protecting the staff, I think that's also really key, that when there's certain things that come in, we know they're overloaded. So as much as possible, you have to kind of almost insist on the email hours. You have to insist on that kind of work hours. We're expecting people to leave at this time, and establishing those sort of cultures really help, because in a startup school, everyone could be emailing till midnight, could be here till 10 o'clock at night, and you just can't allow that to happen because it won't work as a benefit for the school.
Definitely. An email curfews, something we put in really early. And if I send an email on the weekend for any reason, the first line is, I'm really sorry, because I shouldn't be breaking my own rule. Martin, from your perspective then, what's the challenging times? How do you preserve especially your sanity as well? Because I think this is something that we always miss a little bit, is self-care.
I think there's the big things that Emma's talked about, and then she hinted at the end there the culture within the school, and I'm a new convert to coaching. I'm a rather late arrival to that whole coaching culture, and I've had my eyes sort of just widened by this, and I think it's that way of dealing with everybody and being open about it. It just is a wonderful starting point, I think. And when you've got a new school, you can embed this right from the word go. It's not something that you have to change. So this is a luxury for us, and we need to embed that from the start. For me personally, Barry, I think it's a really interesting exercise when you're plopped into a country where you don't know anybody, you're on your own, and you have all the challenges we've just spent an hour talking about. That you do need to protect yourself. Otherwise, the weight of protection falls on your family or those closest to you. I started off on my own out here, excuse me, while my family finished off schooling in the UK, and that was tough. And you quickly have to realise that you've got to shut up the laptop at a fixed time. You've got to do what you enjoy doing, which in my case is sort of watching or playing sport, and just go away and do that. So I have to say, this is where we have to practice what we preach. I tell children to put their mobile phones away during the day, and we've got to do the same thing, because phones are actually a real mixed blessing.
Yeah, definitely, I would agree with that. And I think I'm as guilty as anyone of scrolling through, of reading essays, of scanning emails into the wee small hours when I really shouldn't be. I think one of the things I've done most recently is the phone goes on charge when I get home. So I've got 3 small children, so phone goes on charge, put it away, and I just roll around on the floor and play with trucks and trains and all sorts of other things, which is it's actually quite therapeutic. So I think self-care, but also care of the team. And as you were saying earlier, Martin, the team is these are the important people. These are the people who are going to drive this forward, who are going to make this happen for the students, for the stakeholders, for the families, and are going to create this school. I think schools are a collection of relationships, and we're an important cog in that series of relationships. But you have to look after and the whole engine. Otherwise, you end up kind of stuttering at the start. Yeah. I think that's the conclusion of the questions. I think for me, it's always fun to look at takeaways and look at things that we want people to kind of think about here. I think cultural inclusivity, decision making, communication, managing expectations. I think my takeaway from everything that's been talked about today is communication is key. People are key. Look after yourself and look after your team, and then everything else, it all depends on context and finding the right people to help you with this. Be they teachers, be they local providers, be they local lawyers, be they a bursar with a local connection. And I found that anywhere you go in the world, there's always a word for that. In China it's guanxi, and in the Middle East it's wasta. In Spain we use a phrase enchufado. Are you plugged in? Are you plugged into the local environment? Are you able to maybe make a few phone calls and understand what's happening? And I think that's a really important part, is being part of that local community, and then being able to use that community as another member of your team as you build your school. I'm going to ask one last question and put you on the spot, and we'll go with Emma first. What's the one thing, Emma, you wish you'd known before you took on this challenge? What's the one thing you think, you're looking back, I wish I'd known that?
I think it's what we spoke about, expecting the unexpected, and the things are going to be outside of your control. So, in the past, most things, when I'd been dealt those hands, had been within my control to resolve. And a little bit like Martin said, these are things that they're not in your control. You can't manage everything. You can't predict everything in this scenario. And you have to kind of roll with the punches as they come, and just keep sticking true to what the shared vision and the ethos of the school is, and where you're trying to get to. And you can only do so much, and even when stakeholders might want something different, or parents want something different, there's only those things that you can do that are within your control. And I think that's a real key takeaway. And a little bit like we just said before, allowing yourself to know that's okay, and shutting that door come closing time, putting the phone away come closing time. Those problems will still be there tomorrow. So, take that with you.
Martin, final word.
I think that I hadn't appreciated just how important having strong values and ethos should be when you start out on this journey, because when you recruit, when you're talking to parents, if we don't share those, then everything else is going to be tricky from there on in. And like the opposite, of course, is true. When you have tricky times, if you've got something common already in place, then life becomes much easier. So just being clear about the strong values and ethos, just because it resonates with everybody in your community.
And that's a great final word to use, community. So thank you so much, Martin. Thank you so much, Emma, for sharing an hour of your day. And I know, Emma, you're just coming to the end of your day. So thank you so much for kind of gearing up and being online with us all the way from Penang. So just a couple of things about other elements that we're doing. We have the Leading Your International School podcast. This is people coming on talking about specific aspects of what they do. Previously, Greg Parry was the last episode of this, who sets up schools around the world and is currently doing really amazing things in the Middle East. And then also the Principals blog. So this is, and it doesn't necessarily have to be principals. I think these are blogs coming from people who are practitioners, who are day to day working at the coalface, if I'm allowed to use that cliche, and giving of themselves and giving some key ideas, and it's always a fun read. So I do check those out. That's all from me. Thank you both again, Martin and Emma, and I'll hand back over to Jane for any final words.
Thank you. Well, if we have any questions from the attendees, and then please feel free to ask, and we'll be around here for a few minutes. And in the meantime, that leaves me to share a warm appreciation to our panels, Martin, Emma, and Barry, for being such a great host today. And to our partner, TIC Recruitment, thank you. We shall be returning in due course with our next webinar on working in an international school in partnership with TIC. And if you have any further questions, please do get in touch with us at leadingyourinternationalschool@gmail.com. And you may also connect with our panels via LinkedIn. And here are the LinkedIn QR codes. Also, keep a lookout at our second book, Starting Your International School, which we'll be releasing this autumn. Lastly, LYIS has a 6-week online course, Becoming an International School Principal, starting in January 2024. Our international school consultants will be covering aspects about managing an international school, a role as a principal, learning and accreditations, and many more during this session. And please follow us on WeChat and do scan the QR code to join our LYIS Leadership Mastermind group. It's a goodbye from me and from our guests. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you, guys. If there are any questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I don't see any questions, but if you do have questions, do please reach out to us via the different elements. And I know Andre is the font of all wisdom, is also a great connection to have. So I would reach out to him on LinkedIn, make sure you're connected. He seems to know everyone. It's very frightening. Right.